وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Mutammima al-Ajrumiyya, we have reached the section on the Jawazim. Right? And if you've been diagramming the text, you'll observe how this fits in the structural flow of the text. So we finished the nawasib, right? Now the jawazim. He tells us, قال صاحب متممة الأجرمية الجوازم 18. Right? The jawazim are 18. And the jazm happens to what? To specifically to the mudari', right? Because we've seen that contrary to the author of the Ajrumiyya, the amr is not majzoom, right? It's mabni ala ma yujzamu bihi mudari'uhu, right? The jawazim, we can break it down into ما يجزم فعلا واحدا, right? And these are several, we look at them. And ما يجزم فعلين. So there's 7 that ما يجزم فعلا واحدا, and ما يجزم فعلين, and they're 11, right? And then ما يجزم فعلين, right? ما يجزم فعلين, one needs to be aware of these. What are huruf and what are asma', right? Right? And that's something to pay attention to. And in the case of ما يجزم فعلين, the فعل الأول is called the shart, and the second is called the jawab and jaza', right? And there's situations where it cannot be considered to be the jaza', the consequence. Then you need a fa' or an idha, and we'll look at that. And there's what is the differed upon? Where's the ikhtilaf with the author of the Ajrumiyya? It's on kayfama, right? The author of the Ajrumiyya deemed from the jawazim kayfama, right? Right? And that's that's a Kufi madhab, right? But the majority of the grammarians, and certainly the Basrans, disagreed with that this does not have shawahid fi kalam al-Arab, right? Right? And we'll see that discussion. So the jawazim conceptually are very straightforward, right? Those that yajzim fi'lan wahidan and ma yajzimu fi'lain. Here it's important to note, and that's why you have to make a note what is the Arabic expression for these. So when you say lam, what is lam? Is it a harf or an ism? And what? So it's harf, it has a role, right? So it's jazm, but then what does it do with respect to the meaning? Right? So you need to know that about each of these, and that's important. And the way to do that is you gotta take notes. But this is the kind of stuff that is important to take notes of from the from the commentary, right? Particularly this is where the kawakib is useful. So he says, al-jawazimu thamaniyata ashar, right? Right? And you could also count them as 15. How? Because alam and alamma fall under lam and lamma, right? Because right? Because they fall under lam and lamma, right? And the talab, and we'll see what that comes, because there the jazm is with an muqaddara, and we'll see that, right? And this is the madhab, this is what Mawlana Ibn Hisham did in the Shudhur al-Dhahab, right? What Mawlana Ibn Hisham argued in Shudhur al-Dhahab, and so he actually listed the jawazim as being 15, and you can see this discussion in the Kawakib al-Durriya. وهي نوعان جازم لفعل واحد وجازم لفعلين. The jawazim that make jazm of one fi'l and those that make jazm of two af'als. Right? Now, when they mean one fi'l, this means intrinsically, because they could be things that are majzoom بالتبعية, like with atf, etc. Right? Through the tawabi', na'at, atf, etc. Right? Right? وَجَازِمْ لِفِعْلِينَ, and that which puts two fi'ls into jazm. فالأول, the first of these, which is الذي يجزم فعلا واحدا سبعة, and these are all agreed upon as being huruf. Right? These are all agreed upon as being huruf. Right? وهو لم. Right? ما يجزم فعلا واحدا, it's لم. Right? نحو لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. So لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن, right? So يلد and يولد and يكن are all majzoom with the lam that precedes them. What is with the lam that precedes them? What is lam? It's a harf, right? And it does jazm, but they say it's harfu nafyin wa qalbin wa jazm. Right? So the lam, so Al-Ahdal abbreviates it. He says it's a harfu nafyin wa jazm. It negates and it puts in jazm. But the qalb, because the mudari' indicates what? Present or future, right? Continuity, right? Al-hal or al-istiqbal, because the azmina are thalatha, right? Al-madi wal-hal wal-istiqbal, right? The Arabs say that the times are three: past, present, and future. Mudari' can indicate present or future, right? So what does the mudari' do? What does lam do? It enters on the mudari'. It's a harf. It itself is a harf. It negates the meaning, and it does nafi. Harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb. It negates the meaning, puts the thing in jazm, but it casts the meaning into the past. That's the qalb. Yalidu, right? He gives birth. Lam yalid, it qalaba, it flips the meaning into the past, right? So it's a harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb, right? And that's the meaning of qalb, right? And you can do the i'rab of lam yalid wa lam yulad, right? As we've requested, right? And there's a number of things you'll notice there. For example, يعني, of the different types of yalid is from walada. So what happens to, what kind of letters are these? Walada. What is it? Folks? There's three. What are these? The waw, the alif, the ya. What are these called? Hmm? Are you sure? Yeah, حروف العلة, right? So that relates to sarf, right? But you see some sarf happening, right? So in that, the jazm enters into what? What are the signs of rafa? Dhamma, waw, alif, and noon, right? The signs of nasb are fath. What are they? Good. Fakih, right? Fatha, alif, kasra, ya, hadf, noon. And the signs of jazm are? Sukoon and hadf. Like sah. Right? Hadf, when does it take place? No, not like this is an Arabic class. Yeah, right. فعل المضارع المعتل الآخر, right? Right. But the حروف العلة work in interesting ways, right? Like what happens to the harf illa if it's in the beginning in terms of conjugation, right? In terms of its tasrif. Walada yalidu, right? Right? So you see, so that's just one of the secondary things here, right? Kana yakunu, lam yakun, right? Right? And why did that happen, right? And you can see that when you do the i'rab. Okay. Lam, walamma, right? Right? Now, lamma, there's been ikhtilaf. Is it just lam with an alif added to it, right? 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 But they say that yes, in terms of its origin, yes, but it is in the Arabic language one harf. Lamma is one harf. Right? Right? So yes, it is like lam, and there's a ma, that's zaida, that became merged with it, but it is now one harf. And the ma is nafiya. Right? 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 And there are, again, it is defined as, it's a harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb. Right? Same thing. But there's several things that distinguish the lam, right? And lamma, I wouldn't go into, so this is where, if you are preparing well, if you looked in the Kawakib al-Durriya, he mentioned 7 differences between lamma and lamma. Things like that you overlook, right? Both share in their harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb. The key difference is that lam negates the meaning in the past. But lamma, there's a tawaqqa of thubut and nisba fil mustaqbal. There's an expectation that the thing being negated occur in the future. And the example, in the Quran, بل لما يذوقوا عذاب. They have not yet tasted the punishment. So lamma has a, again, harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb, but lamma, what does it do? There's a tawaqqa husul. They have not yet tasted, right? Lamma, yani laysa ba'd, right? So it's expected to happen. Or in Surah Al-Hujurat, وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ فِي قُلُوبِكُمْ وَلَمَّا يَدْخُلِ. If it's said outside of Revelation, لَمْ يَدْخُلِ الْإِيمَانُ, Iman has not entered your hearts. But لَمَّا يَدْخُلِ, what does it indicate? توقع of حصول, right? There's negation. It's a harf نفي وجزم وقلب with that توقع. There's other differences. I wouldn't pay attention to them too much. Right? نحو قوله تعالى لما يقضي ما أمره. لما, right? لما, he has not yet fulfilled what he's commanded. لما حرف نفي وجزم وقلب. يقضي is what? What's the i'rab of يقضي? بحذف العلة. No, مجزوم بحذف حرف العلة. Right? بحذف حرف العلة. Right? Generally that's how they say it. Right? Which is the ya. Right? Its fa'il is ضمير مستتر جوازا تقديره هو, right? تقديره هو, and then ما is اسم موصول بمعنى الذي, في محل نصب مفعول به. أمره is فعل ماضي, etc. etc. You can see the so that's lamma. And we mentioned a few other examples from the Quran. You can see those if you'd like in the Kawakib, right? Right? Like lamma yadhuqu adhab, lamma yadkhul al-iman fi qulubikum. So you just make a note. There's a few other examples there in the Kawakib al-Durriya. Okay, that's lamma. Alam, right? The relied upon position is here that the jazim is right? Alam, right? Nahu alam nashrah laka sadrak. The jazim is lam, and the Hamza is Hamza istifham. Sorry, here, alam is, this is called hamzat taqreer, right? It's istifham suratan, and they differ how they define it, right? So here, alam, because lil ithbat, it's حرف تقرير وجزم, right? Okay, so it's istifham. Sometimes they call it istifham taqriri, because the actual istifham is a question. أدخلت البيت? Did you? But when the it's so this hamza is of istifham, but it's an affirmative istifham, right? Alam nashrah? Did we not? What's the meaning? We did indeed. Right? So this istifham taqriri. Sometimes they call it hamzat, the hamzat taqreer. Right? There's different usages, right? Alam nashrah. The hamza is of taqreer. The lam harf. What is lam? Harfu nafyin. وجزم وقلب, right? وألم, right? Same thing. It's lamma with a hamzat istifham, right? And it's hamzat istifham taqriri, right? Same thing. Alamma, right? Right, and here you see, who would like to read this line of poetry? No, just it is على حين عاتبت المشيبة على الصبا right? Right? على حين عاتبت المشيبة على الصبا, right? Right? And this was said by Nabigha, right? Right? It says عاتبت, right? And it's been related in more than one way. It's from itab, right? Right? When عاتبت عتاب, when I blamed the mashib, the graying, على الصبا. Siba is youth. Right? Right? Al-mashib can refer to the graying or the growing old, which is the hasil of graying, right? Or what graying indicates. Al-siba, right? Siba refers to either youth or ignorance, right? Siba, right? Right? So Siba is youth, but youth is connected with what? With folly, right? Of immaturity, right? Al-mailu ila al-jahl, right? And the two are interconnected, right? Right? When I blamed the aging despite the folly, right? at the time in which I blamed the graying despite the youthful folly. وَقُلْتُ, and I said to myself, blaming, أَلَمَّا أَصْحُ, have I not yet? Ashu is from sahu, which is the opposite of of being intoxicated. Right? It's not time to become sober. From the drunkenness of the folly of youth. قُلْتُ أَلَمَّا أَصْحُ وَالشَّيْبُ وَازِعٌ. Right? Right? When the shayb, the age or the graying of hair, right, has spread, right, or is a preventative, right? Right? So he says, so the meaning at the end of it, Al-Ahdal explains, المعنى أن الشاعر المذكور بكى لأجل صبوته وميله إلى محبوبه. Right? The poet is crying because of his being intoxicated and inclining towards his beloved. Right? So he blames himself, right, for being busied in that sabwa, in those ignorant ways. Right? Right? Despite this not being the time for this folly, because he has aged. Right? Right? Because someone who's aged, whose hair has gone gray, this is not the time for the madness of love, for those youthful endeavors. Right? Right? And there are many other indicators, right? It's also pointing that shayb, the shayb itself, which is the whiteness of hair, whiteness, the clear color, doesn't admit the blemish that is ignorance. But the shahid is alamma ashu. Right? Ashu is, so alamma, the hamza is hamzat istifham taqriri or hamzat taqrir. Lamma harfu nafyin wa jazmin wa qalb yufidu tawaqqu'a husul al-nisba. That's just addendum. Right? Ashu is fi'lun majzoom, fi'l mudari' majzoom بحذف حرف العلة التي هي الواو etc. ولام الأمر والدعاء. Right? Right? لام الأمر, this is لطلب الدعاء. Right? Right? And so لام الأمر والدعاء and لام الدعاء, they're not two different lams, it's one, right? It's لام الأمر. سميت بلام الدعاء أدبا or تأدبا. Right? Right? Now, commonly they say, so the talab, the common breakdown is talab is of three types. Amr, which is from the a'la to the adna. Dua is from the higher to the lower. Dua is min al-adna ila al-a'la, from the lower to the higher. And iltimas, which is bayna mutasawiyain. So, but this is just what is commonly true, right? Technically, the talab is one, and all three terms can be used. interchangeably as well, right? Especially dua and, right, etc. But there's ikhtilaf about that. That's beyond the scope here. But just to be aware that there's some discussion on it. Lam al-amri wa du'a. Right? What are the examples? لِيُنْفِقْ ذُو سَعَةٍ. Right? Right? لِيُنْفِقْ ذُو سَعَةٍ أي من سعته. Right? And then you have ليقضي علينا ربك ربنا لا تؤاخذنا, right? 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 And if they're between peers, it's called iltimas. We took that, right? He doesn't give an example for that. لا تحزن, right? لا لام الأمر والدعاء لينفق ذو سعة ليقضي علينا ربك. ولا في النهي والدعاء, same thing, right? Right? This opposite of the amr, right? What's the example of that? لا في النهي والدعاء, right? And this is, and so this also is, لا في النهي, it's لا الناهية. And في الدعاء it's the same. It's the لا الناهية but تأدبا. لا تحزن, right? لا is لا ناهية. تحزن فعل مضارع مجزوم بلا الناهية وعلامة جزمه سكون آخره فاعله مستتر وجوبا تقديره أنت. لا تؤاخذنا, this is لا في الدعاء. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إسرا, etc. That's all. لا, but you don't call that لا ناهية. You call it لا في لا في الدعاء, right? Something called لا دعائية, but that's a bit and it's لا ناهية, as opposed to there's a لا النافية, right? Right? So the ناهية تجزم and the لا النافية works differently, right? والطلب, is this in the Ajrumiyya? Right? So how many Jawazim does the Ajrumiyya list? We took one out, which is, well, the Mutammima took one out, which is كيفما. And sorry?
He says 18.
Who says?
Including the Sahib al-Ajrumiyya.
Okay, so he took, so the author of the Mutammima took out كيفما. But he adds what? He adds the talab, so it stays 18. But we would say that there's only 15, because we would remove alam and alamma, because they go back to lamma and lamma, and the talab, right? We will see that this is على قول ضعيف, right? So there's ikhtilaf, and there's ikhtilaf in grammar like in other things, right? والطلب إذا سقطت الفاء من المضارع بعده وقصد به الجزاء. تعالوا أتلوا نحو قوله تعالى تعالوا أتلوا. تعالوا عفوا تعالوا أتلوا. Right? تعالوا أتلوا. Right? So this is majzoom. Right? So he's saying that so here we would put an X. The talab, right? This is listed, but it's not. Right? إذا سقطت الفاء من المضارع. Right? That happens after. Right? تعالوا. Right? أتلو. Right? Because this fa is of consequence. Right? وقصد به الجزاء. Right? The fa that's missing. وقصد به الجزاء. But this is the consequence. تعالوا, there's a talab, and there's a jaza, a consequence, which is atlu. Right? Right? So according to this, there would be an i'rab. Right? There would be an i'rab. تعالوا. تعالوا is فعل أمر مبني على حذف النون والواو للجماعة, etc. أتلو. Why is it majzoom? On this basis is that on what the author of the Mutammima mentions, أتلو is فعل is فعل مضارع مجزوم بجواب الطلب. Right? and علامة جزمه حذف حرف العلة من آخره وهي الواو, because normally it would be أتلو with a waw. Right? تلا يتلو. Right? But the madhab of the majority, does Faki mention this? Good. Right? Is that the jazm is بأداة شرط مقدرة في فعل الشرط دل على ذلك الطلب المذكور. Right? تقدير تعالوا فإن تأتوني أتلو عليكم. Right? Alhamdulillah. And you can see the discussion both in Faki. He mentions this, and Shaykh Allama Khalid al-Azhari agrees as well, and Al-Ahdal mentions that. Right? And then of the most famous of opening lines, right, in Arabic poetry, right, ونحو قوله قفا نبكي من ذكرى حبيب ومنزلي بسقط اللوى بين الدخول فحملي. Now this قفا, let the two of us stand. It's dual. Right? قفا. Right? 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 And what is the right? What's the shahid is nabki, right? قفا نبكي. Right? So baka yabki, قفا Right? So there's fi'l mudari', this is shart, and the jawab of the shart and jaza is nabki. Now qifa, they differed. So we don't worry about the i'rab of this. This is said by Imru al-Qais, and is the opening line, one of the most famous of the mu'allaqat. In many of the collections of the mu'allaqat, this comes first. And is the noon of tawkeed, and it khuffifa bil alif, so it's qifan. You know, it could be qifan, qifa, like it comes up in the Alfiya of Ibn Malik, right? Right? Or is it qifa? Let the two of you stand, nabki. And they said like, and of course there's an ishkal that some of the commentators on the mu'allaqat argue that a lover weeps alone. Right? That if you're in love, why would you say, qifa, let two of you stand, let's all of us cry. Ala min dhikra habibin, in remembering a beloved, wa manzili, and the resting place, right? Where makan al-nuzul, because the caravans would stop somewhere, like in the oasis, etc. Bisiqt al-liwa, etc. Right? But then they moved on. يعني قفا يا صاحبي ولا تعجلا على ذبحي وساعداني في البكاء على ذكرى حبيب ومنزل كائنين على منقطع الرمل بين أجزاء الدخول etc. Right? So saying, my dear two companions, let's stand together and cry in remembering the beloved. And it's interesting, why would one person, why would others cry for you? They say one is that sometimes someone is worthy of enough love that many people love them. Right? Or that a friend shares in the pain, the sahib shares in the pain of their sahib. Right? And that's the nadim. Right? The one who, one of the names for the close companion is the nadim, which is either the drinking partner, because by default, who would get drunk? Lovers would get drunk, because the basis of love is feeling the loss of the beloved or the pain of separation. They call him the nadim. Right? من فاته منك وصل حظه الندم. Right? ومن تكن همه تسمو به الهمم. Etc. So this is, but the so this talab, so he puts it, but the relied upon position is what is mentioned there, that the talab is not, right? So that this is the jaza of, with the shart is mahdhuf. Qifa, فَإِن تَقِفَا نَبْكِ. So this would be the jaza, so become like a, and you can see that i'rab. So the, right? So the shahid is nabki. It's majzoom. It being majzoom is agreed upon. Is it bima'na talab? Yani qifa, or that there's adat shart, and if so it would be under the second category. Like there's an in muqaddara. Now many copies struggle between in and an. So I checked multiple copies of the Kawakib, just as a note. At the beginning, al-Jawazim 18. In my copy, for example, of the Kawakib, it says, وَالْأَصَحْ أَنَّ الْجَزْم بِأَنْ مُقَدَّرَةٍ. It's not an, it's بِإِن مُقَدَّرَةٍ. Right? Do you have that? So if you just make a note that some copies of the Kawakib have that, right? So these are the ما يجزم بنفسه. There are 7, right? But the talab is not one of the 7. Alam and alamma go back to lam and lamma, because the hamza is of istifham, or hamza taqreer, or it's called hamza istifham taqreeri, as we discussed. Then you have ma yajzimu fi'layn. We'll stop there because we have other af'al coming up now. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى التنوير و أن نجعل همه هو سبحانه وتعالى. And of course Jazm is one of the things that, Jazm, what does it indicate? It indicates high resolve, right? Jazama bi-shay', right, is to have resolve in it. So Ibn Ajiba, of course, has some very interesting things to say about Jazm, right? In his commentary. We'll just, because we haven't touched upon it for a while, we'll just mention it very, very briefly. Right, you guys probably have the Khulasat Sharh ibn Ajiba on the Ajrumiyya. Right, and of course keep in mind that we're not that far from the ending. Right. The one thing to be careful about, because a lot of things get put up online, there's one of the copies of, there's a nicer copy of the Sharh al-Ajrumiyya, right? Of Shaykh, but there's a problem with it, which is it's not complete, right? The Khulasat Sharh, it looks much nicer than the older edition, but it's just not complete. So that's, of course, a serious problem. So right, because what does Jazm indicate? Right, Jazm indicates resolve, right? It indicates you need resolve and leave and thabat and حذف يعني كل علة من علل من يعني من علل الضعف في الهمة, right? So there's some important things there, and وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.